Shut him up. Now, Lincoln growled, his voice a lethal rumble that froze the five-star restaurant. I'm trying, sir, the frantic nanny stammered, thrusting a velvet toy at the sobbing 3-year-old. For 20 agonizing minutes, the boy's wails had paralyzed the room. Lincoln, a mafia boss whose name made the city's underworld hold its breath, sat completely powerless. His armed guards hovered like stone gargoyles, ready to draw weapons on anyone who stared too long. Lincoln's dark eyes flashed with dangerous, helpless frustration. That was when Nova, her waitress apron stained with spilled coffee, shoved past the terrifying bodyguards. She slammed a warm plate onto the mahogany table and looked the city's most dangerous man dead in the eye. He doesn't need another toy, she snapped. He just needs a mom. The Heir in Laura, the city's most exclusive dining establishment, was always perfectly climate-controlled, smelling faintly of truffles, expensive Bordeaux, and old money. Tonight, however, it smelled like pure terror. Nova balanced a silver tray of empty champagne flutes on her palm, her flat-soled shoes aching after a grueling double shift. She had spent the last 5 years perfecting the art of being invisible. Invisibility was safety. It kept her hidden from the ghosts of her past, from the people she had run from, and from the harsh reality of the city's brutal hierarchy. But invisibility was impossible tonight. 30 minutes ago, the heavy mahogany doors had swung open, and the temperature in the room had plummeted. Lincoln had walked in. He didn't need to wear a sign declaring who he was. The silence that swept over the room did it for him. He was a man carved from cold marble, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that hid the lethal tension in his shoulders. Beside him walked 3 men who moved with the predatory grace of wolves, their eyes scanning the room for threats. But the most jarring part of his entourage was the small, fragile-looking boy, clutching a plush velvet rabbit, being practically dragged along by a terrified-looking nanny. This was Leo, the heir to an empire built on shadows and blood. They took the secluded corner booth, the one typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. For the first 10 minutes, it was quiet. Then, a dropped fork startled the boy. The nanny reached out too quickly to grab it, her sharp movement frightening him further. The first cry was a small, breathy hiccup. The second was a wail. By the third, it was a full-blown, terrified meltdown. For 20 minutes, the restaurant endured the agonizing sound. Patrons stared at their plates, too afraid to look at the crying child, terrified that catching Lincoln's eye would be a death sentence. The waitstaff huddled by the kitchen doors, drawing straws on who had to refill the table's water glasses. Nova watched from the service station, a damp rag clutched in her hands. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She recognized the boy, not from the news, not from the whispered rumors in the alleyways, but from a photograph hidden beneath the floorboards of her tiny apartment. A photograph of her late sister, Elena, holding a newborn baby. Elena had run away to marry into this world, blinded by a dangerous man's charm. Nova had severed ties, terrified of the violence, changing her name and vanishing into the city's underbelly to survive. 3 years ago, Elena had died in a car accident that smelled of a hit. Nova had mourned in secret, too afraid to attend the funeral, too afraid to claim her nephew. Now, looking at the boy's tear-streaked face, seeing Elena's emerald eyes wide with distress, the invisible walls Nova had built around herself began to crack. The nanny, a stern woman in her 50s, was sharply whispering to the boy, trying to force a silver spoonful of pureed dessert into his mouth. Leo slapped it away. The puree splattered across Lincoln's immaculate suit sleeve. The restaurant collectively stopped breathing. Lincoln looked down at the stain, then at the nanny. His voice didn't rise, but the low, glacial baritone carried across the silent room. "If he does not stop crying in the next 10 seconds, you will never work in this city again." The nanny panicked, grabbing the boy's arm perhaps a fraction too hard. Leo screamed louder, a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. Nova didn't think. The survival instinct that had kept her alive for 5 years short-circuited. She dropped the damp rag, grabbed a warm plate of simple toasted bread from the warming rack, and marched across the dining room. "Hey!" one of the guards barked, stepping into her path. He was a mountain of a man, his hand hovering over the bulge beneath his suit jacket. "Back off, waitress." Nova didn't even blink. "The kid is hungry and terrified, and your guerrilla tactics are making it worse. Move." The guard's eyes widened in shock at her audacity. Before he could react, Lincoln raised a single, scarred finger. The guard instantly stepped aside, though his hand remained near his weapon. Nova stepped up to the table. Up close, Lincoln was even more intimidating. His face was a landscape of harsh angles, his eyes dark, tired, and utterly ruthless. He looked at her as if she were an insect that had crawled onto his table. "Who let you over here?" Lincoln asked, his voice a quiet rumble. Nova ignored him. She ignored the terrifying aura, the guards, and the terrified nanny. She looked only at the boy. Leo was hyperventilating, his small chest heaving, his face flushed red. He looked so much like Elena that it felt like a physical blow to Nova's chest. She slammed the warm plate of toast onto the table, the sharp clack of porcelain cutting through the noise. Then she uttered the words that would change her life forever. "He doesn't need another toy. He doesn't need an army. He just needs a mom." The silence that followed was absolute. The nanny gasped. The guards tensed, waiting for the order to drag this suicidal waitress out back. Lincoln's eyes locked onto Nova's. The temperature around them seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The air was so thick with tension, it felt like wading through deep water. "What did you say to me?" Lincoln asked softly. Nova knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to eye level with the weeping child. She ignored the mob boss completely. She reached out, her movements slow and deliberate, and gently uncurled Leo's small, tight fists. "Shh," Nova whispered, her voice altering, softening into a cadence she hadn't used in years. "It's too loud in here, isn't it? Too bright. Too many angry men." Leo sniffled, his green eyes locking onto hers. He didn't pull away. Nova began to hum. It was a melody from the old country, a haunting, sweet lullaby about a silver moon and a sleeping wolf. It was the song their grandmother used to sing to them, the song Elena had sworn she would sing to her own children one day. As the melody left Nova's lips, Lincoln stiffened. The color drained from his face. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Leo's cries hitched. He took a shaky breath, mesmerized by the strange woman humming the familiar tune. Slowly, the frantic energy drained from his small body. He leaned forward, resting his tear-soaked cheek against the rough fabric of Nova's apron. Nova wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his soft hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and salt. Her eyes squeezed shut as a rogue tear escaped down her own cheek. "I've got you," she thought. "Auntie has you." For 3 full minutes, the only sound in the corner of the restaurant was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the now sleeping boy, and the faint, haunting hum of the waitress. Finally, Nova carefully shifted her weight, preparing to stand back up. She felt the heavy gaze of Lincoln burning into the top of her head. "Where did you learn that song?" Lincoln demanded. The dangerous calm was gone. His voice was laced with an urgency, a desperate vulnerability that he tried instantly to mask. Nova froze. She had slipped up. The emotional overload of seeing her nephew had overridden her caution. She kept her eyes on the floor, gently resting Leo against the velvet booth cushions. My mother used to sing it to me. Nova lied smoothly, rising to her feet and smoothing her apron. It's a common tune. No, it isn't, Lincoln said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My wife used to sing it. She said it was a family secret, that only her bloodline knew it. Nova forced her expression into a mask of polite, professional confusion. I'm sorry, sir. I must have heard it somewhere else. I'll get back to my tables. She turned to leave, but a large, calloused hand clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a guard. It was Lincoln. His grip was an iron vice. You aren't going anywhere, Lincoln said. He looked at the nanny. You're fired. Get out of my sight before I have Silas throw you into the river. The nanny scrambled out of the booth and fled the restaurant without a word. Lincoln turned his intense, dark gaze back to Nova. You just put my son to sleep in 3 minutes, something I haven't been able to do in 3 years without him waking up screaming. What's your name? Nova. She lied, giving the name she had adopted 5 years ago. Well, Nova, Lincoln said, finally releasing her wrist. You no longer work here. You work for me now. You are Leo's new caretaker. You leave with us tonight. I can't do that, Nova said, panic rising in her throat. Being close to him meant being scrutinized. Being scrutinized meant being discovered. And if the mob boss found out she was the sister of the wife he might have had a hand in killing, she was dead. Lincoln leaned back, producing a thick clip of $100 bills from his jacket and tossing it onto the table. I wasn't asking. The ride to Lincoln's estate was suffocating. Nova sat in the back of the armored SUV. The sleeping Leo sprawled across her lap, his small fingers still clutching the fabric of her apron. Lincoln sat in the passenger seat, his massive frame silhouetted against the passing streetlights. In the driver's seat was Silas, Lincoln's right-hand man. Silas had eyes like chips of flint and a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone. He had watched Nova through the rear-view mirror the entire ride, his gaze suspicious and calculating. Nova's mind raced. She was trapped in a moving steel cage with the most dangerous men in the city. Her apartment, her fake life, her meager savings, all abandoned in an instant. But as she looked down at Leo's peaceful face, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Elena was gone, but her son was here. He was surrounded by monsters, crying out for the mother he had lost. Nova couldn't walk away. She had to protect him, even if it meant stepping into the lion's den. The SUV passed through massive wrought-iron gates, crunching over a long gravel driveway before stopping in front of a sprawling, Gothic-style mansion. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Stone gargoyles perched on the eaves, and security cameras blinked their red eyes from every corner. Welcome to the estate, Silas muttered, killing the engine. Nova carefully carried Leo inside. The interior was vast, cold, and meticulously clean. Everything was made of dark wood, marble, and leather. It felt like a museum, devoid of any warmth or childhood joy. There were no toys in the hallway, no photographs on the walls. His room is on the second floor, end of the east wing, Lincoln said, shrugging off his suit jacket. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the restaurant fading, leaving behind a profound weariness. Silas will show you to your quarters. They are adjacent to Leo's. You are to be with him at all times. If he wakes up, you handle it. If he is hungry, you feed him. If he bleeds. Lincoln's eyes hardened. You pray. Understood, Nova said, keeping her voice even. She followed Silas up the grand staircase. The man moved silently, like a predator stalking its prey. So Silas drawled as they walked down a long, dimly lit corridor. A waitress who moonlights as a child whisperer. Pretty convenient. I've worked with kids before. Nova lied, shifting Leo's weight in her arms. I have younger siblings. Is that right? Silas stopped in front of a heavy oak door. He turned to face her, stepping uncomfortably close. Lincoln might be blinded by his kid finally shutting up, but I'm not. We run background checks on everyone who breathes near this property. By tomorrow morning, I'll know what grade you got in 3rd grade math. If you're a spy for the Moretti family, or an undercover cop, I won't wait for Lincoln's permission to end you. I'll bury you in the woods out back, and no one will ever find you. Nova met his flinty gaze without flinching. She had lived in fear for 5 years. This thug wasn't going to break her now. Not when Leo needed her. If I were an assassin, Silas, I wouldn't have used toast as a weapon, she replied coldly. Now, open the door. The boy is heavy. Silas narrowed his eyes, a flicker of begrudging respect crossing his scarred face. He pushed the door open. Leo's room was massive, filled with expensive, untouched toys. An enormous wooden rocking horse sat in the corner, gathering dust. The bed was a large, elaborate structure that looked more suited for a king than a toddler. Nova gently laid him down, pulling the heavy duvet over his small body. She stood by the bed, watching him sleep. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of her grief for her sister. I'm here, Elena, she thought, tracing the line of Leo's jaw. I'll keep him safe from them, I promise. The first week was a blur of exhausting vigilance. Nova quickly learned the rhythms of the estate. It was a house of ghosts and secrets. Armed men patrolled the grounds. Men with quiet voices and heavy coats came and went at all hours of the night. And Lincoln was a phantom, disappearing into his study for days at a time. But Nova's entire world was Leo. She transformed his sterile bedroom into a sanctuary. She pushed the heavy, antique furniture against the walls to create a massive play area. She requested finger paints, building blocks, and picture books items the household staff had to scramble to procure. Bewildered by the requests, slowly, the traumatized, silent boy began to thaw. He stopped flinching. When doors closed too loudly, he started to laugh, a brassy, bubbling sound that echoed strangely in the cavernous halls of the mansion. Nova discovered he had an allergy to strawberries, a fact she remembered Elena mentioning in one of her old, tear-stained letters. When the chef attempted to serve Leo a strawberry tart, Nova had slapped the plate out of his hands, earning her a terrifying glare from Silas, but saving Leo from a severe reaction. Lincoln's presence in Leo's life was complicated. Nova watched them from a distance. Lincoln loved the boy. It was evident in the way his eyes tracked Leo across a room, a desperate, protective hunger in his gaze. But he was terrified of him. Lincoln didn't know how to play. He didn't know how to speak softly. He treated his son like a fragile, explosive device that might detonate if handled incorrectly. One rainy afternoon, Nova sat on the floor with Leo, building a massive, wobbly tower out of wooden blocks. Lincoln stood in the doorway, a shadow against the light of the hallway, watching them. He's laughing, Lincoln said, his voice quiet. It sounded like an accusation and a prayer all at once. He's a child. It's what they do, Nova replied, carefully placing another block on the tower. When they feel safe, Lincoln walked into the room, his heavy footsteps making the floorboards groan. He knelt beside the tower, his massive frame dwarfing the small wooden blocks. He reached out a scarred hand and clumsily placed a block on top. The tower swayed, but held. Leo looked up at his father, his green eyes wide. Then, a small smile broke across his face. Daddy did it. Lincoln exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He looked at Nova, the cold, ruthless exterior cracking just a fraction, revealing the exhausted, grieving man beneath. She used to build towers with him, Lincoln said softly, his eyes fixed on the blocks. My wife, Elena. Hearing her sister's name spoken aloud by the man she believed might have killed her, sent a jolt of electricity down Nova's spine. She forced her hands to remain steady, picking up another block. "She sounds like she was a wonderful mother," Nova said carefully. Lincoln's jaw tightened. "She was light. This whole world, this life, it's dark. She was the only bright thing in it. And then she was gone." "Car accident," Nova said, testing the waters, needing to hear his reaction. Lincoln looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a terrifying intensity. "That's what the police report said. That's what the papers printed. It was raining." She lost control of the car. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "But I know the truth. The brakes were cut. Someone took her from me. And when I find out who gave the order, I won't just kill them. I will burn their entire bloodline to ashes." Nova swallowed hard, her heart pounding. The raw, violent grief in his voice was undeniable. He hadn't killed Elena. He had loved her, and he was hunting her killers. The revelation tilted Nova's world on its axis. If Lincoln wasn't the monster who killed her sister, then who was? And did that mean Leo was still in danger? Before she could process the thought, Leo knocked the tower over with a joyful shout. The wooden blocks clattered loudly against the floor. Lincoln flinched, instinctively reaching for his waistband. Before catching himself, he stood up abruptly. The moment of connection shattered. "Keep him inside today," Lincoln ordered, his voice cold once more. "Things are volatile downtown. I don't want him near the windows." He turned and walked out, leaving Nova alone with her racing thoughts and a sudden, terrifying realization. She was no longer just protecting Leo from his father's world. She was trapped in it with them. The estate was a labyrinth, but there was one door on the third floor that remained permanently locked. It was made of heavy mahogany, adorned with intricate hand-carved vines. Nova had asked the head housekeeper about it once, and was met with a look of sheer terror. "The master's sanctuary," the woman had whispered. "No one goes in, not even to clean." Nova's instincts told her that the room belonged to Elena. For 3 weeks, she had successfully evaded Silas's deep background checks. She had bought her fake identity from one of the best forgers in the city 5 years ago. Nova Vance had a verifiable work history, a fake social security number, and absolutely no ties to Elena Rossi. But Silas was relentless. He constantly questioned her, trying to trip her up on small details about her fabricated past. Nova needed to know more about her sister's life in this house. She needed to know who might have wanted her dead. If Lincoln was telling the truth about the cut breaks, the threat was internal or from a rival family who knew the estate's vulnerabilities. On a Tuesday, Lincoln left the estate to meet with the heads of the 5 families, a high-stakes sit-down to address the rising tensions downtown. He took Silas and a dozen heavily armed men with him. The house was quieter than usual. After putting Leo down for his afternoon nap, Nova crept up the grand staircase to the 3rd floor. The hallway was unlit, the air heavy with dust and silence. She reached the carved mahogany door and gripped the brass handle. It was, as expected, locked. Nova pulled a bobby pin from her hair. Growing up on the rough side of town, before Elena met Lincoln, the sisters had learned a few unsavory skills to survive. Picking a standard tumbler lock was one of them. She slid the pin into the keyhole, feeling for the pins. It took her 3 tense minutes, listening to the heavy silence of the house before she heard the satisfying click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling faintly of dried lavender and expensive perfume. Nova flipped the light switch. Her breath hitched in her throat. The room was perfectly preserved. It was a shrine. Elena's clothes still hung in the open closet. Her vanity was cluttered with silver hairbrushes, half-empty perfume bottles, and framed photographs. Nova walked slowly into the room, tears burning her eyes. She picked up a silver hairbrush, running her thumb over the bristles. She could almost see Elena sitting there, brushing her long, dark hair, laughing at a joke. She moved to the bedside table. There was a small, leather-bound journal sitting next to a brass reading lamp. Nova opened it, her hands trembling. The entries were short, written in Elena's elegant, looping cursive. October 12th. Lincoln is away again. The house feels too big. Silas looks at me with such disdain. He thinks I make Lincoln weak. I think he hates me. Nova frowned, tracing the words. Silas. She turned the page. November 4th. I found a listening device in the nursery today. I haven't told Lincoln. He's already so paranoid. It will tip him over the edge. I don't know who put it there. The Morettis? Or someone inside the house? I'm taking Leo to the safe house tomorrow. I don't feel safe here anymore. The entry was dated the day before Elena died. Nova's blood ran cold. Elena knew she was being hunted, and she suspected someone inside the house. Suddenly, a heavy footstep sounded in the hallway outside. Nova froze. She had left the door unlocked. I know you're in there. The voice was a low, raspy growl. Silas. Nova spun around as the door swung open. Silas stood in the doorway, his eyes dark with fury. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, resting casually against his thigh. He hadn't gone with Lincoln to the sit-down. It was a trap. I've been waiting for you to slip, Silas said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. You've been too perfect, too good with the kid, too calm around the boss. And now, I find you snooping in the dead wife's shrine. I was looking for extra blankets. Nova lied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Leo was cold. There are no blankets in here, Silas said, taking a step closer. He raised the gun, pointing it squarely at her chest. Lincoln is blinded by his grief. He looks at you and sees a way to appease his screaming child. But I look at you and see a rat. The Morettis sent you, didn't they? To finish the job, they started with Elena. I don't know who the Morettis are, Nova said, stepping back until her spine hit the vanity. I'm just a nanny. Bullshit, Silas spat. He closed the distance between them, pressing the cold barrel of the gun against her forehead. I dug deeper into your background. Nova, the paper trail is flawless, too flawless. A real person has speeding tickets, debt, an embarrassing photo on the internet. You have nothing. You popped into existence 5 years ago. Now, you're going to tell me who you really are, or I'm going to paint this vanity with your brains and tell Lincoln you were caught stealing. Nova stared into the eyes of the man who had likely ordered the hit on her sister. If she told him the truth, he would kill her instantly to cover his tracks. If she lied, he would kill her for being a spy. You cut the brakes, Nova whispered, the realization solidifying into a deadly certainty. You thought she made Lincoln weak. You put the bug in the nursery. You killed her. Silas's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of shock that she knew the truth. That was all the confirmation she needed. Smart girl, Silas sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Too bad you won't live to tell him. Nova didn't think, she reacted. She grabbed the heavy silver perfume bottle off the vanity and smashed it directly into Silas's face. The heavy glass shattered against his cheekbone. Silas roared in pain, stumbling backward, the gun discharging. The suppressed bullet shattered the vanity mirror into 1,000 jagged pieces, raining glass down on them. Nova lunged forward, kicking the back of Silas's knee. He buckled, but swung his arm back, striking her across the jaw with the heavy handle of the gun. The world flashed white. Nova hit the floor hard, tasting copper. Silas recovered, wiping a mixture of blood and expensive perfume from his eye. He leveled the gun at her again, his chest heaving. Dead rat. Before he could pull the trigger, the heavy mahogany door was violently kicked open. Lincoln stood in the doorway. He was breathing heavily, his suit jacket off, his white shirt stained with rain. He looked like a demon summoned from the depths of hell. Silas froze, the gun still pointed at Nova. "Boss, I caught her. She's a spy. She was in Elena's room. She attacked me." Lincoln looked at the shattered mirror, the blood on Silas's face, and Nova crumpled on the floor. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Put the gun down, Silas," Lincoln said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Boss, you don't understand. I said." Lincoln roared, a sound that shook the walls. "Put the gun down!" Silas slowly lowered the weapon. Lincoln stepped into the room. He didn't look at Silas. He looked down at Nova. "Get up." Nova scrambled to her feet, her jaw throbbing, her heart hammering violently. She had survived Silas, but now she had to survive Lincoln. "In my study. Both of you. Now." Lincoln commanded. Turning on his heel, the reckoning had arrived. Lincoln's study was a cavern of dark wood and leather, lined with thousands of books he likely never read. The only light came from a crackling fireplace, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Lincoln sat behind a massive mahogany desk. Silas stood to his right, holding a bloody handkerchief to his bruised face. Nova stood in the center of the room, feeling like a lamb in a slaughterhouse. "Start talking," Lincoln said, leaning back in his leather chair. He steepled his fingers, staring at Nova with an unblinking, predatory gaze. "She's a plant, boss," Silas interjected quickly. "Her background is a forgery. The best money can buy, but still fake. She broke into Elena's room to snoop. She's gathering intel for the Morettas. I say we take her down to the basement and find out exactly what she knows." Lincoln raised a hand, silencing Silas instantly. "I didn't ask you, Silas. I asked her." He shifted his gaze to Nova. "Who are you?" Nova's mind raced. The truth was her only shield, but it was also a sword that could cut her down. If she told Lincoln that Silas killed Elena, Silas would deny it, and Lincoln would believe his right-hand man over a nanny with a fake identity. She needed proof. And until she had it, she had to play a dangerous game of half-truths. "My name is Nova," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "And my background is fake." Silas smirked in triumph. Lincoln's expression remained unreadable. "Why?" Lincoln asked softly. "Because 5 years ago, I witnessed a murder." Nova lied, spinning a story she had rehearsed 1,000 times in the dark. A low-level enforcer for the Moretti family shot a man in an alleyway. He saw me. I ran. I knew going to the cops would be a death sentence, so I bought a new identity and disappeared. I've been hiding ever since. She looked Lincoln straight in the eye, projecting every ounce of sincerity she possessed. "I didn't seek you out. You dragged me out of that restaurant. I stayed because of Leo. He needed someone who wasn't afraid of a crying child. I went into that room today because I was looking for something of his mother's, a blanket, a scent, something to help him sleep through the night. I didn't mean to pry." Lincoln stared at her, studying her face for any micro-expression of deceit. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "A touching story," Silas sneered, "and highly convenient. She's lying, boss. Let me—" "Enough," Lincoln snapped. He stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Nova. He was so close she could smell the rain and cigar smoke on his clothes. "You lied to me," Lincoln said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You brought a fake name and a hidden past into my home, into my son's life, to protect myself." Nova shot back. refusing to back down. Just like you have guards and guns to protect yourself. I just used paper. Lincoln's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand, and Nova instinctively flinched, bracing for a blow. Instead, his hand gently touched her bruised jaw where Silas had struck her. His touch was shockingly gentle. "Silas," Lincoln said, not looking away from Nova. "Go down to the perimeter." The sit-down today went poorly. "The Morettis are making a move. We need every man on the walls tonight." Silas bristled, clearly furious at being dismissed. "Boss, you can't leave her alone with—" "I said, go," Lincoln barked, the absolute authority of the Mafia boss flashing out. Silas clenched his jaw, glaring at Nova with pure, unadulterated hatred, before turning and storming out of the study. Once the door clicked shut, Lincoln dropped his hand from Nova's face. He walked over to a crystal decanter, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Drink," he ordered. Nova took a sip. The whiskey burned down her throat, settling her trembling nerves. "I don't trust you, Nova," Lincoln said, walking back to his desk. "Silas is right. Your story is convenient, but I also know my son hasn't had a night terror since you arrived. I know he laughs now, and I know you just fought off my best enforcer with a perfume bottle." He looked at her, a strange mixture of respect and suspicion in his eyes. "You stay," Lincoln said. "But you do not leave this floor. You do not make phone calls. And if you so much as look at a door leading outside, my men have orders to shoot you. We are going to war with the Morettis tonight. If you survive the night, we will discuss your future." Nova nodded slowly, gripping the whiskey glass. "And Leo?" "Leo stays in the safe room in the basement. You will stay with him." Lincoln's face hardened. "Keep him quiet. Whatever happens upstairs, do not come out." The assault began at 2 a.m. It didn't start with a bang, but with complete darkness. The power grid to the entire estate was cut. The heavy, oppressive silence that followed lasted only seconds before the sound of shattered glass and automatic gunfire ripped through the night. Nova was already awake. She was sitting on the floor of the subterranean safe room, her back against the reinforced steel door. The room was illuminated by emergency red lights, casting a hellish glow over the plush carpeting and stocked shelves of emergency supplies. Leo was asleep on a cot in the corner, clutching the velvet rabbit. Nova had given him a mild sedative prescribed by the estate doctor for his night terrors, ensuring he wouldn't wake up screaming and give away their position if the soundproofing failed. Above them, the house was a war zone. The muffled, heavy thud of explosives shook dust from the ceiling. Nova could hear the faint, rapid pop, pop, pop of returning fire. Lincoln's men were fighting back, but the Morettis had brought a small army. Nova's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She wasn't just a nanny hiding in a basement. She was a woman trapped in a cage, waiting to see who would open the door. If Lincoln's men won, she lived to face another interrogation. If the Morettis won, they would breach the safe room and kill the heir to the empire, and her along with him. And then there was Silas. Nova pulled her knees to her chest, her mind racing. Silas knew she was onto him. In the chaos of a siege, it would be incredibly easy for him to slip away, breach the safe room, kill her and Leo, and blame it on the Morettis. It was the perfect cover for a double murder. "He's coming down here," she realized, with a sickening jolt of certainty. "He's not going to wait for the fight upstairs to end." Nova scrambled to her feet. She began tearing through the emergency supply crates. Water, rations, medical kits, no weapons. The safe room was designed to keep people out, not to arm the people inside. She needed a weapon. She looked around the room frantically. Her eyes landed on a heavy iron fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It wasn't a gun, but it was heavy, and she could swing it. She unlatched it. the cold metal heavy in her trembling hands. She positioned herself beside the steel door, holding her breath. 10 minutes passed. The gunfire upstairs seemed to be moving closer to the main staircase. Then she heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the electronic keypad on the outside of the door. The keypad was overridden from the inside, but a physical override key existed. Lincoln had one. Silas had the other. The heavy steel locking bolts began to clunk back into the door frame. Chunk, chunk, chunk. Someone was opening the door. Nova raised the fire extinguisher, her muscles coiled tight as springs. She prepared to swing with everything she had. The heavy steel door swung open. A figure stepped into the red emergency light. It wasn't Silas. It was Lincoln. He was covered in blood. Though whether it was his own or someone else's, Nova couldn't tell. His white shirt was torn, and his chest heaved with exertion. He held an assault rifle in his right hand, the barrel smoking. He looked around the room, his wild eyes immediately locking onto the sleeping form of his son. A massive shudder went through his broad shoulders. Nova lowered the fire extinguisher, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for an hour. Lincoln. Before he could speak, a shadow detached itself from the hallway behind him. "Drop the gun, boss." Lincoln froze. Nova gasped. Silas stepped into the light of the doorway, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the back of Lincoln's head. Silas was bleeding from a shrapnel wound on his shoulder, his face twisted in a mask of desperate fury. "Kick the rifle away," Silas ordered, his finger tight on the trigger. Lincoln, his eyes burning with a rage so intense it was almost palpable, slowly bent down and slid the rifle across the carpet. It came to rest near Nova's feet. "What is this, Silas?" Lincoln asked, his voice deadly calm. "The Morettis are slaughtering our men upstairs, and you pull a gun on me?" "The Morettis are a distraction," Silas sneered, stepping into the safe room and kicking the heavy steel door shut behind him. The electronic locks engaged with a heavy thud, sealing the three of them and the sleeping child inside. "I let them in," Silas confessed, his eyes darting between Lincoln and Nova. "I gave them the perimeter codes. I told them if they took out the bulk of your forces, they could have the docks. I just wanted one thing in return." "My life," Lincoln said, turning his head slightly. "Your empire," Silas corrected. "You went soft, Lincoln. Ever since you married that woman, you started making deals instead of making examples. You started talking about legitimacy. You were going to ruin everything we built. So, I took her out, cut the brakes." Tragic accident. Lincoln's entire body went rigid. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, the sound of a wounded animal realizing who had bitten it. "It was you," Lincoln whispered, the devastation in his voice absolute. "It was business," Silas said coldly. "But then the kid survived, and you got even worse. You became a ghost. You stopped leading. I had to clean up your messes. And now you bring this rat into the house." He pointed the gun at Nova. "She figured it out, Lincoln. She knew about the brakes. I couldn't let her talk to you. I have to end this tonight. The Morettis take you out. I swoop in, rally the surviving men, and take the throne. It's poetic, really. You'll never get away with this," Lincoln said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating pure violence. "My men are loyal. Your men are currently dying on the second floor," Silas countered. He leveled the gun at Lincoln's chest. "It's over, boss." Nova's eyes flicked to the assault rifle on the floor, then to Silas, then to Lincoln. She had to do something. If Silas killed Lincoln, she and Leo were next. "Silas, wait!" Nova shouted, stepping forward, drawing the traitor's attention. "You don't have to kill the boy. Let me take him. We'll disappear. You can tell everyone the Morettis took him." Silas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You think I'm an idiot? The kid is the legitimate heir. As long as he breathes, there will be men loyal to his bloodline. No, the kid dies. You die. Lincoln dies. He shifted his aim toward the cot where Leo was sleeping. No! Lincoln roared, lunging forward. Bang! The deafening roar of the gunshot in the small enclosed room was physically agonizing. Lincoln stumbled back, clutching his side, blood instantly blooming across his white shirt. He hit the wall and slid to the floor, groaning in pain. Silas smirked, turning the gun back toward Nova. Your turn, Nanny. Nova didn't scream. She didn't beg. The survival instinct that had kept her alive on the streets, the love she had for her sister, the fierce, maternal protection she felt for the sleeping boy, it all coalesced into a single white-hot moment of clarity. She wasn't going to die here. With a feral scream, Nova hefted the heavy iron fire extinguisher and hurled it with all her might directly at Silas's head. Silas instinctively raised his arm to block the flying cylinder. The heavy iron smashed into his forearm with a sickening crunch of breaking bone. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling. Nova didn't hesitate. She dove to the floor, grabbing the discarded assault rifle. She had never fired a weapon like this in her life, but she knew how to pull a trigger. She rolled onto her back, raised the barrel, and squeezed. The recoil bruised her shoulder, the loud burst of fire deafening her. Silas's body jerked violently as 3 rounds caught him in the chest. His eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at the blood rapidly staining his shirt, then looked at Nova, his mouth opening in a silent gasp. He crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the carpet. The silence that followed was ringing, thick with the smell of cordite and copper. Nova lay on the floor, her breathing ragged, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't let go of the rifle. She had killed a man. A low groan snapped her back to reality. Lincoln was slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding side. He looked at Silas's body, then at Nova, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. You shot him," Lincoln rasped. Nova scrambled over to him, her hands trembling as she pressed a sterile gauze pad from an open medical kit against his wound. "Keep pressure on it. The bullet passed through, I think, but you're bleeding fast." Lincoln gripped her wrist, his strength fading, but his eyes piercing. "Who are you? A waitress doesn't throw a fire extinguisher and fire an AR-15. Who sent you?" The adrenaline, the terror, the sheer exhaustion of the lie finally broke Nova. The walls she had built around her identity shattered completely. "No one sent me," Nova cried, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the dust and grime. "I came because of the boy, because he was crying for a mother he didn't have, because I couldn't leave him with the men who killed my sister." Lincoln froze, his grip on her wrist loosening. "Your sister?" Nova looked him dead in the eye, the absolute truth stripping away her fake accent, her meek demeanor, everything. "My name isn't Nova," she said, her voice shaking with 5 years of repressed grief. "My name is Nova Rossi. Elena was my older sister." The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the gun smoke. Lincoln stared at her, his dark eyes wide, struggling to process the impossible truth while fighting the shock of blood loss. "Elena didn't have a sister. She told me she was an only child, an orphan. She lied to protect me," Nova said fiercely, pressing harder on his wound, making him wince. "When she met you, she knew what you were. She knew the danger. I begged her not to go with you. We fought. It was terrible. She told me that if she entered your world, I had to vanish. That she would tell you she had no family, so your enemies could never use me against her. I changed my name. I hid. For 5 years, I let her be dead to me so we could both survive." Tears dripped off Nova's chin, landing on Lincoln's blood-soaked shirt. "Then, 3 years ago, I saw the news. The car crash. I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew your world had swallowed her whole. I wanted to run in, to take Leo, to scream at you, but I was terrified. You were a monster to me. The monster who took my sister. Lincoln's expression fractured. The ruthless Mafia Don dissolved, leaving only a broken, grieving man. He looked away, staring blankly at the red emergency light. She protected you, Lincoln whispered, his voice cracking. She protected you from me. Yes, Nova said softly. But then I saw him in that restaurant. I heard him crying. I saw her eyes in his face. I couldn't hide anymore. I didn't care if you killed me. I had to protect her son. Lincoln slowly turned his head back to look at her. The suspicion, the coldness that had defined their interactions was entirely gone. He saw the resemblance now. It wasn't in her features, but in the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes. The same fire Elena had possessed. Your Aunt Nova, he said. The words feeling foreign on his tongue. Yes, she choked out. Above them, the gunfire began to taper off. The heavy, booming voice of Lincoln's captain echoed through the ventilation shafts, shouting orders. Lincoln's men had turned the tide. The Morettis were retreating. The house is secure, Lincoln murmured, his eyes drooping. Silas. Silas was the leak. With him dead, the Morettis don't have the codes anymore. They'll run. Stay awake, Lincoln, Nova pleaded, grabbing his face with her bloodied hands. Don't close your eyes. Leo needs you. Leo has you. Lincoln smiled. A weak, sad expression. He has his mother's blood. He's safe with you. No, he needs his father, Nova insisted, her voice frantic. She couldn't let him die. Despite everything, despite the empire of blood he ruled, she had seen the way he loved his son. He was a flawed, dangerous man, but he was all Leo had left of a father. You have to fix this, Lincoln. You have to clean up this life. For him, the heavy steel door suddenly beeped, the electronic locks disengaging. Lincoln's men had overridden the system from the outside. The door swung open, revealing a team of heavily armed guards, their flashlights cutting through the red gloom. "Boss!" the captain shouted, rushing into the room. Medics followed immediately behind him, swarming Lincoln. Nova was pushed aside. She stumbled back, hitting the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. The medics worked frantically, applying pressure, starting an IV. Lincoln fought to stay conscious, his eyes locking onto Nova through the chaos of moving bodies. "Don't let her leave," Lincoln rasped to his captain, pointing a bloody finger at Nova. Treat her like family. She's untouchable." The captain looked at Nova in surprise, then nodded sharply. "Yes, boss." As they lifted Lincoln onto a stretcher and carried him out of the safe room, Nova slowly crawled over to the cot. The sedative had worked perfectly. Leo hadn't stirred through the gunfire, the betrayal, or the shouting. Nova carefully climbed onto the cot, wrapping her arms protectively around her nephew. She buried her face in his hair, inhaling the scent of him, letting the adrenaline finally crash. She had stepped out of the shadows. The invisible waitress was dead. She was Nova Rossi, and she was finally home. Lincoln survived. The bullet had missed his vital organs, but the recovery was slow. For 2 weeks, the estate was in a state of hypervigilance. The Moretti family, reeling from their failed assault and the loss of their inside man, retreated into the shadows. The city held its breath, waiting for Lincoln's retaliation, but the retaliation never came. Instead, Lincoln summoned the heads of his remaining lieutenants to his hospital bed. He gave orders that sent shockwaves through the underworld. He was liquidating the most violent arms of his syndicate. The docks, the protection rackets, the illegal casinos, he handed them over to rival families or shut them down entirely, keeping only the legitimate front businesses and real estate holdings. It was a staggering display of concession. It was a declaration of peace, bought with a massive loss of power and territory. His men grumbled, some calling him weak. But the memory of Silas's betrayal kept them in line. Nova spent those 2 weeks entirely with Leo. The mansion, though heavily guarded, felt different. The oppressive darkness had lifted slightly. The staff, having heard the whispers of how the nanny had killed Silas the traitor to save the boss, treated her with a mixture of terror and profound respect. One sunny afternoon, Nova was sitting in the gardens with Leo. He was chasing a butterfly, his laughter ringing clear across the manicured lawns. The sound of a cane crunching on gravel made Nova turn. Lincoln was walking toward them, moving slowly, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane. He looked paler, older, but the dangerous tension that usually coiled in his shoulders was gone. "He's fast," Lincoln said, stopping a few feet away, watching his son. "He gets that from his mother," Nova said softly. "We used to race down the fire escapes in the Bronx. She always won." Lincoln smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "I would have liked to see that." He slowly lowered himself onto a stone bench next to Nova, sighing as he took the weight off his healing side. "The capitulation is complete," Lincoln said, looking out over the gardens. "I've divested from the streets. We're legitimate now. Real estate, import, export, boring, legal money. The other families think I've lost my nerve. Have you?" Nova asked, turning to look at him. Lincoln met her gaze. "No, I found my reason to live. Silas was right about one thing. This life, the violence, it took Elena. I won't let it take Leo, and I won't let it take you." Nova looked down at her hands. The invisible walls she had lived behind for 5 years were completely gone. She felt exposed, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. "So, what happens now?" Nova asked. "I'm still the waitress who lied to you. You're the woman who saved my son. You're the woman who saved my life," Lincoln corrected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He handed it to her. Nova opened it hesitantly. Inside rested a delicate silver locket. It was Elena's, the one she had worn every day before she disappeared. "She left it behind when she took her final drive," Lincoln said quietly. "I want you to have it." Nova traced the intricate silver etching, tears pricking her eyes. She snapped it open. Inside was a picture of a younger Elena and a much younger Nova, smiling brightly at the camera. "Thank you," Nova whispered, clasping the locket around her neck. The cool metal settled against her collarbone, a physical reminder that she was no longer hiding. Leo came running back, holding out a fistful of slightly crushed dandelions. "For Auntie Nova and Daddy." He handed them a crushed yellow flower each. Lincoln took it gently, twirling the stem between his large fingers. "Leo," Lincoln said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you like having Auntie Nova here?" Leo nodded vigorously. "Yes. She sings the moon song." Lincoln looked at Nova, an unspoken question in his eyes. He wasn't the terrifying mob boss anymore. He was a father, asking the only family he had left to stay. "She's not going anywhere, Leo," Nova said, smiling through her tears. She reached out and took Lincoln's hand, his rough, scarred palm warm against hers. "Auntie Nova is staying right here." Chapter 10. The Foundation. Years passed, and the legacy of the city shifted. The name Lincoln no longer conjured images of dark alleys and violent retributions. Instead, it became synonymous with aggressive real estate development and massive philanthropic donations to children's hospitals. The transition wasn't bloodless, nor was it easy. Ghosts of the past occasionally surfaced. There were threats, extortion attempts, and moments where the old wolf inside Lincoln threatened to break free. But every time the darkness encroached, Nova was there. She was the anchor, the fierce protector of the family's new foundation. Leo grew into a bright, resilient boy. He had his mother's eyes and his father's quiet strength, but his spirit was entirely shaped by Nova. He never knew the true depths of the empire he was born into. He only knew the sprawling estate as a place of laughter, strict homework rules enforced by his aunt, and quiet evenings building models with his father. Nova never married Lincoln. Their relationship was deeper than romance. It was a bond forged in blood, trauma, and a mutual devotion to the boy who carried Elena's memory. They were co-parents, partners in survival, and the fiercest of allies. The locked room on the 3rd floor was eventually opened. Nova and Lincoln spent a week sorting through Elena's belongings, crying, laughing, and finally laying the ghosts to rest. The room was transformed into a massive library for Leo, the heavy mahogany door replaced with French glass. On Leo's 10th birthday, the estate was filled with light. Children from his private school ran across the lawns, music played, and the chefs, who no longer lived in fear of serving the wrong dessert, presented a massive strawberry-free cake. Nova stood on the veranda, watching the chaos with a warm smile. She wore a simple, elegant dress, the silver locket resting against her chest. Lincoln walked up beside her, handing her a glass of champagne. His hair was touched with gray, the harsh lines of his face softened by years of peace. "He's happy," Lincoln said, watching Leo enthusiastically rip the wrapping paper off a telescope. "He is," Nova agreed, clinking her glass against his. "Silas almost won that night," Lincoln mused, his voice low, a rare acknowledgement of the past. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't fought back." "I was running for 5 years, Lincoln," Nova said, looking at the boy who was the center of her universe. "But the thing about running is, you eventually get tired, and sometimes you just have to turn around, pick up a fire extinguisher, and build a new life out of the wreckage." Lincoln chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "To the waitress who saved the empire," he toasted. "To the mother who never left," Nova corrected gently, tapping her locket. They stood together in the sunlight, no longer creatures of the shadows, watching the boy they had saved, the boy who had saved them both, look up at the sky, ready to discover his own stars. Sometimes the family we are born into breaks us, but the family we fight for saves us. Nova and Lincoln's journey proves that the darkest empires can be dismantled by the light of a single, courageous act of love. True strength isn't found in intimidation or power, but in the willingness to step into the line of fire for the innocent. If you enjoyed this tense, emotional story of hidden truths and redemption, please hit the like button. Share this story with someone who loves a dramatic twist, and subscribe for more cinematic narratives. Your support helps bring more powerful stories to life.